Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, President, Dale Carnegie Tokyo Training. My special guest today is a new friend of mine, Tim Hewitt, a fellow Aussie, who is the Representative Director and Country Head for BMS here in Japan. Tim, welcome.
Thanks, Greg. It's great to be here.
What is BMS? You better explain to our listeners, viewers, what is BMS? What's this all about?
So BMS is a British headquartered specialty insurance broker. We compete with the likes of the bigger names like Aon and Marsh, but unlike Aon and Marsh, who might be providing everything to everyone, we are a niche specialty broker focusing on high-end complex insurance solutions where you need an expert to be the broker for those solutions.
So interestingly enough, you talk about these big players here. I mean, Japan's awash with Japanese insurance companies of all varieties. And you've got all the big international companies here. So why does Japan need a BMS? Where's the niche here? Because, it seems like a real red ocean of a lot of competition. So it's very interesting you've decided to set up shop here.
Indeed. In particular, what I focus on is insurance solutions for M&A transactions. And simply, there's just not many people here in the market that can broker such solutions.
So what does that mean? I'm going to have an M&A with a company, either on the receiving end or the buying end.
Yep.
And what am I insuring against?
So typically, there's lots of different insurance solutions that can cover it. There's no such thing as M&A insurance.
Right, okay.
Right. And so what we do is, depending on the nature of the risk of the transactions, we will tailor a solution that has a combination of different policies. The most popular is something that's called reps and warranties insurance or warranties and indemnities insurance, depending on if you come from the UK or the US. And what that covers for is breaches, financial losses that manifest from a breach of a representation or warranty given under a sale agreement. So if you're the buyer of a company, you'll try and seek from the seller a suite of reps and warranties in relation to that business. So, in terms of what we call fundamental reps and warranties, which things go to the title, titles of the shares, authority to sell the shares, and capacity. And then there's what we call general reps and warranties, which are more about operational aspects to the business. And this is things like financial reps and warranties. Have you done your accounts in accordance with GAAP? Do you own your intellectual property? Those sort of things. Now, normally, you try and negotiate, you get those reps and warranties. It's a bit like buying a house. You go and do your inspection, you'll get a termite report and try and, find out things.
Structural report.
Exactly, right? And if you see some defects, then you'll negotiate the price down. And that's exactly the same thing. So you'll conduct your due diligence and anything that comes out of that due diligence will be your known risks. I sort of analogize those to kind of like your pre-existing health conditions in a health insurance policy. Now, for that, you can't get insurance for because they're known risks. But what about the things that you can't see? Things that didn't come out in the due diligence. That's what this type of insurance covers.
The name Elon Musk is coming into my mind immediately with his purchase of Twitter.
Right.
He needed some of your insurance, I'm sure, before he made that purchase, because he didn't do his due diligence, he didn't get his reps and warrants correct, and he also had a lot of unknowns in terms of his claim around the number of actual users, etc., etc., etc. So I guess that's a good example of someone who probably didn't do it the right way, and he's lost a lot of money as a result. And that's all public information. So we don't have secret knowledge of Elon Musk's dealings here, but that's what we read in the newspapers, right? So that's a good example of where, if you want to consider what could possibly go wrong and insure yourself against that, then that would be something like that would be a good thing to do. But I'm guessing that's a very high profile case of how probably not to do it.
That is a good example. I'll give you another one as well. But one key point there to highlight with this type of insurance, it's not, because I'm getting insurance, I don't need to conduct a due diligence.
Yep.
A underwriter, an insurance company, will only underwrite a transaction where there has been a robust due diligence that's been conducted by a reputable, advisor. So that's, where it's your finance, your tax due diligence, it's one of the big four. Where it's, your legal due diligence, it's depending on the size of the company. But, a law firm that's kind of commiserate with that level of company.
Right.
So, you know, if it's a massive conglomerate, you'd expect, you know, a top tier law firm to have done the due diligence.
So anyway, that's what you do. Okay, great. Now, your career, I must say, is very unique. I don't think I've met anybody in my meetings so far, certainly none of my interviews, have had the same sort of career path as you. Now, as I understand it, you're an exchange student here when you were young, about 16, and you then, like a lot of Aussie lawyers, you know, wound up in Japan after having had that Japan exposure.
Right.
And then you sort of leapt out of the law, and you went into in-house counsel, and then you went into sales, head of sales. I've read that and I've gone,
You've done your diligence well.
what's an Aussie lawyer running around, playing around in the sales, you know, sandpit here, and then now you sort of went back into the law again, and then bingo, you're actually running the whole show here in Japan. So let's go back, and I've given a quick snapshot of your career, only for the point that it's very unique. It's very unusual. So normally you've come through two great law firms in Australia. You come up here, you'd expect to be in the law for some period of time as a lawyer, but you've not done that. And somewhere in there, you've interspersed with an MBA as well in the States, as I understand. So
That's right.
Just walk us back through your career a little bit. Like, you thought you're going to be a lawyer, then you thought, I'm not going to be a lawyer. So what happened there?
I guess, you know, I didn't grow up with a certain expectation or, you know, a pressure that I had to be a lawyer, for example. And that was very new in my family. We were a family of really teachers and nurses.
Right.
And so that was never sort of on the cards for me to become a lawyer. As people, you know, who know me well, you know, often say you're not the sort of personality we would think ever becomes a lawyer.
Is that because you're not detail oriented, or
no, quite the opposite actually. But I do, you know, partly because I'm quite gregarious.
Okay.
You know, during school,
You're
I
too
was
interesting to be a lawyer. Is that what you're
apparently
telling
something like that. You know,
and much too interesting.
I think I prefer to be, as much as, you know, being on camera is a little bit confronting at times. I like to be, you know, outside with people, not stuck in an office behind the desk.
Right.
So,
which is what a lot of lawyers spend most of their day doing, isn't it?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah. So that sort of explains a little bit of, you know, why, you know, maybe I found myself into a different trajectory. Because I think as you go on, you gravitate to things that kind of suit your personality. But
how did the Japan piece fit in there? Like, you obviously were on some sort of school exchange program or something, and how would that come about?
It was. I mean, I was a beneficiary of the close ties, you know, between Japan and Australia that obviously are still there. But when I was going through, you know, high school, Japan was Australia's largest trading partner.
Yep. And
at the time, Japan was going very, you know, hard with, you know, soft power, if you like, setting up the sister city arrangements with local cities around Australia. And it just happened that, you know, also, if you recall, in Australia, we had this scheme called LOT, where you had to do language other than English, and you had to do at least a year's of LOT. And at my school, it was only Japanese that was offered. And on the back of a very active teacher there, who was herself an exchange student, I'm going to say in the early 70s, which I hope I didn't accidentally age her too much by saying that. We haven't
revealed her secret name, so no, she'll be okay.
But, you know, thanks to her sort of commitment and finding a local high school in Japan, in the sister city where I came from, which was the Blue Mountains in Australia.
Blue Mountains. Now we're talking country here.
Indeed.
We're talking, you know, what are we, 100 kilometres outside of Sydney?
Literally 80 kilometres. My house was out of Sydney. Yeah.
Right. So you're up on the range. People who don't know, Sydney's quite flat, and then you hit this big plateau, this mountain called the Blue Mountains.
Yep.
So I don't know what the elevation is, but it's quite high, and it's all agricultural. It's very small towns. It's sparse population.
Indeed. Yeah, it's not. I wouldn't call it rural.
It's not sheep country there.
No, it's not quite that. But it's not, you know, the outer suburbs of Sydney.
No.
It's very much a different kind of.
You're a super Westie.
Indeed.
Yes.
I actually won a poem contest when I was in year 5, because Why the West is Best. But that's a whole nother story.
I can't wait to hear that one.
That's for another podcast. But just to explain you that,
What's the name of the city in Blue Mountains? It's actually got a sister city relationship in Japan.
So it's the Blue Mountains has a sister city.
Itself.
It's the city of the Blue Mountains.
Oh, okay.
So it's a city within a national park, and their sister city in Japan is a place called Sanda in Hyogo.
Oh, Sanda in Hyogo, right?
Yeah, which is just on the outskirts of Kobe.
Kobe, yes, I know where Sanda is.
So it's a very similar kind of, Sanda itself is not rural.
No.
But if the further, beyond you go Sanda, you go to places like Sasayama, it starts to get very rural. And it's close to the city, but not in the city.
In the city, yes.
So it's a very same.
It's on the ocean too.
Sanda's not on the ocean.
Sanda's not the ocean? Oh,
No.
what am I mixing? I'm mixing up something else. Okay, it doesn't matter. Anyway, close, but close.
But nonetheless, here I was, this kid who had grown up, in a, I would say, middle to above middle class family with a teacher. Father was a teacher. My father was a history teacher. My mother was a nurse. And thanks to the local high school having this program with Japan and the teacher really putting a lot of effort, by some good fortune, I became the Blue Mountains exchange to Japan in '97.
First one?
Not the first one. There were some before me, and there were some after me. But unfortunately, this exchange hasn't continued on.
Oh, really?
From I understand. I think just because it really was off the effort of two high school teachers in these different cities, and it becomes very difficult, to have families look after for kids and that, and it wasn't structured like an AFS or a Rotary kind of program.
So it's rather independent, personalised. Yeah.
Indeed, but because of that, I ended up staying with the one host family for the whole year, and they very much became my family.
Yeah.
And thanks to them, my Japanese became very good.
Yes.
And everything kind of snowballed from that.
Yeah.
And then coming back to Australia to do my last year, I did so well in Japanese that I got into law school.
Wow, I did so well in Japanese when I went to law school. You must have shot the lights out for your Japanese exams.
I think I came second in the state.
Wow.
And by a stroke of good fortune, when I came back, a new teacher arrived at the high school who was Japanese.
Oh, okay.
And there I was, basically it was me and her.
Yeah.
I had a dedicated Japanese tutor in my last year of high school. So.
Fantastic.
But yeah, Japanese has been my meal ticket.
Yeah.
That's the moral of this podcast, and this will be the recurring theme.
Okay.
So everything I have achieved or career-wise has somehow I can link back to that experience.
So you go and do your law degree in Australia. I think it's ANU, the ANU, right? Australian National University in Canberra. So there's nothing to do in Canberra but study. So you can imagine you're an excellent student of law in Canberra when you're going through uni, and then you join a couple of different law firms in Australia. And at some point, you then go off and do an MBA. So that's, again, I don't know, maybe it's becoming more typical with lawyers. I'm not sure. They're starting to branch out into more commercial degrees. I mean, there's a lot of combination degrees in Australia of some commercial subjects and Japanese. They're not in the language centre. Your whole degree's got bits and pieces of things together. So that's Australia's quite advanced in that regard. But what made you decide? Was it Kellogg? Was it Kellogg? You went to the Kellogg school. So what made you decide there? What made you decide to do that? And you paid for it yourself, which is even more impressive. So explain the logic there. This is a bit of career advice for people.
As I said before, I didn't have this burning desire, if you like, or pressure to become a lawyer. So I hadn't really, until I was in the profession, I didn't really know what it would mean. Now, when you start, and I was very fortunate with that experience, and also to have been picked up by actually a top tier US law firm setting up their Australian office, and that was my first graduate role. And I must admit, it was an incredible ego trip.
Did you do your 2 years working with them before you finished the degree as a trainee, or you?
Yes, the way it works in Australia, to get qualified, you need to have done a year's worth of experience before you get your license.
Okay.
And so, literally, after I did my training year in Australia, and then I was fortunately called to Japan by a firm here. It has been an interesting trajectory, and one that I wouldn't have expected. When I had started out. The way it all kind of worked was, as I said, because I did so well in Japanese, I got into law school. At the end of, I went to the ANU, as you said. Now, at the ANU, you'd be persona non grata, to use a legal term, if you said to other students that you want to be a commercial lawyer.
Why?
ANU is all about public international law. And in my cohort, there are people like my former flatmate of a few days, a lady called Jen Robinson, who is now very famous as a human rights barrister in London, including representing Julian Assange. And she's an example of, the big human rights focus that was at ANU. And a lot of people want to, go into work for the UN or other sort of international organizations or work in foreign affairs. So, and that was certainly, I was one of those people.
Right.
It just happened that commercial opportunities were sort of knocking on my door at the end of my degree.
Particularly, I guess, because you spoke Japanese, you understood Japanese.
Indeed. I think the person who hired me actually was very much a Japophile, and he himself was into my first commercial law firm, and that was our connection. Even before there, during university, I actually was lucky enough to do a stint working for the UN. Technically speaking, I was secretary to the High Commissioners for Refugees in Australia. And how I got that role was talking about Japan, because he was appointed by, I think it's Sadako Ogawa, who once upon a time was the High Commissioner for Refugees. Yeah. So this is,
a famous lady, Ogata-san.
Indeed. And so this is, how I keep being able to link, my sort of...
The glue.
Yeah, the glue, that experience of being exchanged in Japan to every kind of opportunity I had after that. Back to sort of, you I kind of went from one thing to the other, from private practice and then into sales.
Why go out of the law and why do an MBA? I mean, that's sort of unusual and not super unusual, but unusual.
Sure. In fact, everyone at the time was saying, don't do that. Why would a lawyer? And you definitely, as I started to mention, when you become a lawyer, you kind of, like any profession, I think you start to think, I'm a lawyer, therefore, and I should be, have a certain way of thinking. I should have a certain view about my career and what it means to be a lawyer.
Right.
I should wear a certain type of suit, I should have a certain type of watch because I'm a lawyer, I decided I didn't want to be trapped by any of those kind of, adornments or preconceptions about what this career should mean. And also, I tied myself very much to living here in Japan. And
so you wanted to come back?
Indeed. So for me, the sort of the holy grail, if you like, was being a lawyer in Japan. Finished my university in Sydney. As much as I wanted to go off and, work at the UN and which would have required doing a master's in international public law in Geneva somewhere, I didn't have, my dad's checkbook to do that. So, it was very important. I had to go and start working. And I was just fortunate that, commercial law firm and a top tier law firm had offered me, a clerkship and then a junior associateship. Fast forward, in Japan, I sort of came to Japan a bit too early, it turned out. Oh, really? Because to work
how does that work?
To work in a long term in a private practice law firm in Japan, you need to qualify as what they call Gaikoku Ho Jimu Bengoshi.
Gaiben.
Indeed. And for that, you need to have at least 3 years experience, 2 of which need to be in your home jurisdiction.
I think they've changed that now, haven't they? I think they've reduced it. Is that true, or I got that wrong?
I need to look up. It doesn't really apply to me anymore. So
no, but I think yes. I think maybe a couple of years ago they toned it down a bit. They wound it down a bit so it wasn't so demanding. But anyway, that's a.
So ironically for me, I came to this realization or predicament that in order to stay in Japan long term, I was going to have to leave it. So that was the reason for going back to Australia.
Ah, okay.
And then I joked that I retooled to be a bigger tool. I retooled as a more commercial lawyer as opposed to being a corporate lawyer.
And what's the difference between a commercial lawyer and a corporate lawyer?
So that's a great question because often people confuse them. A corporate lawyer is more about advising how companies are. Okay. In their existence. Okay. Whereas a commercial lawyer is more about advising companies about what they do.
Right. Okay.
Just as a transaction, if I can put it that simply.
Right.
and I was working, and often the transition for me was working on M&A transactions as a corporate lawyer.
Okay.
And then often is the case, then, there's once the acquisition has taken place, there's usually transitional services, which is more sort of operational, commercial. And the team, within the law firm often changes from, the corporate team to, say, more commercial team, often what's often might be the TMT, the transaction, telecommunications or other sort of contracting team. And they're doing the services agreements, and which more is in relation to the operations of a company. On my move back to Japan, after I went back to Australia, it was only to be a temporary thing because my life was here in Japan, my partner was in Japan, but I just needed to get the time for Guy Ben. And so the original plan was to go back into a law firm. And at the time, because I was working as a tech lawyer, a recruiter who's a good friend of mine, she was actually had the job for Hulu as a general counsel. And she said, look, I've got this, it's really interesting you're doing tech stuff because, these sort of things are coming up. And for those who don't know Hulu is what they wanted to become, what Netflix did become, sort of an aggregator for content and a streaming service.
And everyone's watching it now because Shogun's on Hulu.
That's right. That's right. So there's, they're still a player, but that role, she said, look, Tim, you're not quite senior enough, but I just wanted to let you know this stuff is out there. A few weeks later, she calls me back and says, that job I told you about at Hulu, do you want to apply for it? And I'm like, oh, the one you told me I wasn't senior enough for. The one, and she said, yep, but I'm really struggling to place people for it. Right. And I'm thinking, well, if you're struggling to place much more senior people, then what are my chances? And she said, well, there's this test. There was a test for it. She said, do you want to sit the test? I'm like, sure. And it turned out to be a content acquisition agreement, which was the kind of agreement I was marking up every day in my practice back in Australia. Did the test, and a couple of days later, I was on a plane back here to Japan. It was between me and another person, and who was native Japanese for the job in the end. They decided to go with that other person, but because of that, this recruiter was placing me into sort of different roles, and then that's how I came to an in-house opportunity, which I ended up working for. And this was a foreign-owned, a Fidelity-owned network company here in Japan at the time called KVH. Ended up becoming,
which is now called Colt, right?
Correct. And so that was my first foray in-house, and it was just a perfect job for me at the time. They were looking for a network lawyer. They were looking for they were expanding overseas. They were looking for someone who could speak Japanese. It was really a job that was kind of really for me.
How did you go from being on the sort of law side into the commercial side? Because you started running couple of sales operations.
Indeed. So
that was like, I was looking at your resume going, how did he manage that,
So I guess I worked my way through the ranks of that company. And because, I'm being a commercial lawyer, my job was to help facilitate sales. I was very much on the big deals with this company. And this company was very much in expansion mode. We were, we're setting up a data center footprint and a network footprint in Hong Kong, Singapore, Korea, and the US. And as I got close, and I was very much the head of sales was my mentor, and taught me everything I kind of know about negotiation, deal strategy, etc. And then eventually I was kind of wanted to be a part of it. I felt I was part of, the deal making, and I wanted to have a chance to get on that side. And I had a very supportive boss who helped sort of pave the road for me to take on a commercial role.
Yeah, which again is unusual for lawyers to get your hands dirty like that, the deal making side of things, as opposed to deal killing side of things, which is usually the lawyer's image, right?
Well, that's right. But when you're in-house, your job is to facilitate business.
Yeah, that's true.
And there is almost a bit of an existential crisis you might have, because particularly if you've come as a private practice lawyer, your job is, to be extremely detail-oriented, to find those little mistakes, to really labor over the smallest things that might often, slow down a deal or really not be that consequential in the greater scheme of things.
And also, there's a bridge there between being a lawyer who's taking care of deals, and then you're actually running a section with salespeople. And I didn't see too much of the resume about leadership training, learning how to be a leader, especially leader of salespeople, who are by far one of the hardest groups to lead. So, how did that go, that first? And also from their point of view, they're like, well, does this guy actually know anything? Should we follow him? Because there's going to be a lot of, I guess, question marks on their side, but potentially, I don't know, maybe because they knew it didn't matter. But how did you bridge from being a sort of, I'm going to say, technical expert, inverted commas, a lawyer, into a person leading a sales team? That's interesting for me.
It's a great question. And rather how it came about, was I successful in that? Initially, no. To your point, it was extremely difficult to sort of build up trust and credibility with the team. It was very obnoxious, actually, when I think about what I was doing, and particularly in a Japanese environment. You can imagine, who was the head of legal, and I had a lovely big office all to my own, and a bit of prestige, around being a bengoshi, and coming from private practice in the company. And I built up a good reputation of being good at my job. And one day, there I go downstairs to the sales floor, and it was very much a traditional setup at the time, where, like, I think people are familiar with, Japanese banks, where you have, like the tellers at the
desks,
right, and then the hierarchy behind them, kind of overlooking. It was very similar to that. And my position as a director, by rights, I should have sat at a certain desk. And as I went to put down my bag on that desk, a director next to me said, "That's where directors sit." And and so there was very much
welcome
indeed.
To the team there, Tim.
And so
welcome aboard.
And I was like, "You're right, but maybe I'll sit with the team just to So,
and were you actually a director at that time?
I was,
but he didn't recognize you as being a director.
No,
because he didn't get the email.
The fellow
or he
director
didn't agree with it.
There's a look. I don't want to say anything disparaging about my former company, and I don't have anything disparaging to say. But what was sort of really evident at this time was that people couldn't understand.
Yeah.
And the leadership team that I was becoming a part of couldn't understand why the head of legal would all of a sudden want to come down and be on the sales floor. And of course it was obnoxious in the sense that, here people had sort of understand their own sort of, political environment, and have been in that environment some time. And then I just swoop in. And, from their perspective, I hadn't done the hard yards, or, who was I to be there? What do I know about sales?
Exactly.
So, and it's not like a director of one of the sales teams could have gone up and been the head of legal. So that was a very interesting leadership challenge.
So just prior to that, you're going to move from a very specialized area of the business, which you have a great deal of expertise and experience, to another part of the business where you have no experience and perhaps potentially no expertise. So did you have a plan in mind, or did you just think, well, I'm the director, I'll just turn up and run the place? I mean, how did you approach that?
That's a very good question. It probably, I was very conscious because, having gone out and done an MBA, that if I ever wanted to be, the CEO of, or in a senior leadership, if I could be so bold to say such, that I'd need a sales experience. So first and foremost, it was kind of, imperative to get that. And I was very lucky that I had the support of headquarters.
So, sorry, has the MBA been completed already?
It had been completed.
Oh, okay. So you took time out to go and do an MBA?
No, I was doing it whilst working.
Oh, okay. So you're in Japan doing it as an executive MBA type of approach.
Yep.
Okay, right. So you're not actually away from the campus over there.
Well, yeah. It's kind of, you can, before COVID times, and even we've probably gone back to a world where this is possible, but I was flying into Hong Kong.
Oh, okay.
Basically.
Lucky you did it when you did.
Indeed, for 2 weekends a month. And my sister lives in Hong Kong, so I was able to sort of, that week in between. And I had a sort of a standing agreement with my boss at the time, who wasn't very supportive of me doing this.
But was not?
He was not. And again, because why would we support a lawyer? You've been hired as a lawyer for the business.
Okay, right.
But I had a sort of a standing agreement with him that I could be in any city, anytime.
All right.
If within reason.
All right.
It was a bit, again, this work from anywhere, remote working type sort of arrangements weren't very common.
Not at that time.
At that time at all. So in that sense, I was a bit of a pioneer to sort of, push the company to agree to allow that.
Yeah. And so you're doing the MBA while you're working, and then at this point in time, while you're doing that, you become the director of sales. Is that how it works?
I became, this was, for that initial position in Japan, I was, we might have a little chat. I'll just speak freely about what happened. We might have a little chat about what has to be edited because I don't want to incriminate.
You tell us what gets good. Well, put it this way. If there's something you don't want to be broadcast, don't say it. Make it easy. No point getting me excited about something that we can't use. Better to not do that. I got a weak heart, I don't get too excited. So the fundamental question here is, okay, how do you go about approaching this change?
Indeed.
And what was your plan? That's what I want to hear. Was there a plan? We haven't got to that part yet. So
yeah,
did you have a plan, or you just sort of turned up? How did it work?
So I at that time, as I said, I was obnoxiously ambitious.
Right.
I had a great run with legal in this company.
Mm-hmm.
I became very much, a senior leader in the company and part of the management. And I was very much close to the deals. And I wanted, I was excited to try my hand at that. I think I'd always wanted to experience the business side. And so the plan was, yes, first and foremost, to get a sales role. I was launched into the sales team as an overlay sales, even though I was a director. Now,
what does an overlay sales mean?
Exactly. That was the question on...
So your business card, overlay sales director.
Indeed. Normally you'll have like a technical overlay on sales who might be an engineer.
I see.
And they're part of the sales team to sort of, particularly in this company, it was an engineer because it was a network company, give the kind of the technical advice you need for a sales pitch. But their job is, not necessarily, is really just on every kind of pitch, advising on the technical aspect.
Okay.
I was the Tim Hewitt overlay. Now, there's not a future in that. And that became very apparent. So once in the role, it became very difficult to sort of stay as such. Now, that became very apparent, both for myself and for the company.
Right.
And what was maybe a concession that was negotiated levels above me to facilitate that transition, then became, a discussion about my future in the company and where we would go.
Right.
At the time, there's some different machinations and discussions, and there was an opening for a role to lead the indirect sales channel.
Right. What's the indirect sales channel?
That's
what does that mean?
That's like your partner sales. You don't.
Okay.
Right. You're working with channel partners and stuff and such. So, if you like, that was more of
part of the distribution.
Indeed.
System.
Indeed. Yeah. Indeed. So we had a range of agents who sold our services on our behalf, and it was managing those agents. And funnily enough, there was a need to make a lot of changes in that that channel that were actually quite legal in nature. So it was a role that really sort of, suited my skill set as a lawyer, to basically change the kind of the way we contract with those agents. And so I led that transformation project, and that was kind of a project that once that came to an end, there was sort of a discussion as to what other role I would take on within the business. So just to package that all together, that company was extremely, agile in terms of how they saw their employees and saw a skill set. And so I was a beneficiary of that because they allowed someone like myself who was in a very technical role to be able to transition and try something else and take that skill set in a different capacity. For myself, that facilitated, the sales experience I wanted to sort of lead into a different direction.
And how about, as you say, what are you putting your stuff on this table for here, Tim? This is for directors. You want to sit somewhere else. That's your initial welcome to the team. But at some point, you've actually got people working for you and they're reporting to you. and you have to lead them, and you have to have some degree of credibility with them. So how did you bridge into that? How did you enable yourself to actually lead a team and have them follow you?
You know, what you said before, I think is a great example of Japan as well. And, you know, what you'll face as a foreigner in certain situations in Japan that might not be in other places. But to answer your question in terms of how to build up loyalty and trust within the team, I think it was, I didn't try to pretend I knew what, had the technical expertise they had. And it was really kind of getting behind a few key people and really supporting them to have the limelight, to be the technical advisor on that. But then to offer them something that I could offer them, in terms of raising their profile or, getting a deal across the line, helping them with their numbers. And that was, particularly on deal negotiation, deal strategy and things like that.
Yeah.
And because we were, there's a transformational period for this channel that I ended up working in. It was, and we had to effectively, almost get ourselves in a very litigious situation by changing the terms of agents' agreements and this sort of thing. I was able to kind of, give the kind of legal support, the legal input that that team needed to do so. So I think that's where I was able to offer something of value to the team. And probably that was the source of, being, successful in that role.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now.
You're doing that role for how long?
That role, it's altogether was 2 years.
Okay, that's quite a long time. To were we boiling the frog? The frog didn't jump out, or did the frog jump out?
I mean, look, what experiences I had, and I said when I first started, as I said, it was more. And this is perhaps my naivety of, as a kind of mid to late 30s, ambitious young man here in Japan. I was just determined to get that experience and to be in that role without perhaps really thinking about the plan, to be a successful leader in that role. And as I said, I encountered lots of opposition. And it wasn't, as you find in Japan, it wasn't direct.
Subterranean.
Indeed. I mean, one example was we had a partner sales conference. And this is at a time where there was an update to privacy law. You might have heard of the European GPA, and that it has an update to make sure that you privacy by design became a legal requirement. And so
this is just before COVID then?
Yes. And for a network company, this was that meant all of a sudden, historically, if you had like a data breach, it'd probably be your lawyers, your compliance team called up to give evidence as to, what kind of policies you might have had in place. But this new law that required privacy by design, it almost kind of put focus on your network engineers, your CIO, your chief information officer, as to what kind of protocols, what kind of systems are you putting in place. And as a network provider that had firewalls and other sort of network security, it was a perfect sort of way of demonstrating privacy by design. So here I am, the lawyer who's supposed to know a lot about this sort of thing, but now a salesperson, had prepared for our partner conference a whole presentation on this, and we'd rehearsed it. And when it came to the day, well, for some reason I was left off. Now, again, I'm not saying anything disparaging about people, and I don't think it was necessarily intentional, perhaps, but these were the challenges I faced. And that, as you said, was more a reflection on, well, I hadn't built up enough credibility within, the Japanese team.
Well, okay, let's flip it around. Okay, we've got 20/20 vision in hindsight now, a perfect view of the rear vision mirror of what could have gone on. Thinking back, if you'd actually done it again, how would you have approached it to try and get that credibility, get that acceptance, and be on the dance card to give your talk at the conference, rather than being left off?
It's a very good question. I probably wouldn't have gone in so hard so fast. And I probably would have, spent more time, developing, the relationships with the team and finding opportunities to, add value to each one of those deals as that overlay, as opposed to say, I'm here, therefore.
Get out of my way, here I come.
Indeed. So it was a very, at the time, a wonderful kind of, and humbling experience. But as a foreigner in Japan, you always, I think, have these kind of moments where you miscalculate. You think that, you've been in an organization for a long time, you've built up credibility a certain way. It's normal in Japanese companies to rotate into different organizations.
That's right. Yeah, every couple of years.
Every couple of years. So why would this be any different?
Yeah.
But as the foreigner, you're often very much with a certain, particularly like myself, with a certain skill set and a certain profile.
Well, their rotation's a bit different.
Yeah.
They know that they're going to, well, it's changing, but generally speaking, they know they're going to be in that firm for quite a long time, and they're going to rotate through a number of general positions and become a generalist, and they will probably retire in that company. Whereas foreigners, maybe we're going to be around, maybe we aren't going to be around. We're not in the same rotation that they're in. So we're always that one step off the mainstream of the Japanese mainstream, aren't we? Just by our very nature of being foreigners, right? So, and people will see us like that. They'll say, well, this guy was going to be here for probably a couple of years, and then particularly new bosses, right? You've been in that section a long time, or that company a long time, and suddenly your boss gets off the plane and has got some sparkly, shiny ideas, and you think, well, okay, so you get your watch out and have a look at the time. Well, how long is this guy going to be around, or this gal going to be around for? I'll just wait him out, and then the next one will turn up, and we'll just keep going with what we really want to do.
Yep.
Which is a very typical pattern. That is not an unusual pattern in Japan, depending on the skill of the leader, to make sure that doesn't happen, right? And so when you get here, you don't know Japan. It's happening. You don't even know it's happening, right? And then you get on a plane, you go home. You're oblivious to most of that's going on around you. So it's not just you or me. That's a general pattern, I think. So you realise that it probably went a bit too fast, a bit too hard. Any other things that sort of occurred to you that on reflection, you do it again, you do it a little bit differently?
No, I think that's, look, I'm glad I did it.
Okay.
I'm glad I did, in terms of, that moment when I left my office, the legal office upstairs, and went downstairs to the sales floor. It was, it was guttural. It was very visceral kind of feeling of like, oh, here I go. I'm kind of jumping off the cliff. I'm glad I did that in my career. Mm-hmm. It's made, it's given me an incredible skill set, I think, and a learning that I couldn't have ever appreciated if I hadn't actually did it. Yes, like I said before, I would have probably gone, made sure that the way I was going to be announced into that team, how that was going to happen, I would have been focused on that.
It sounds like the runway wasn't quite finished for you when you landed there,
Indeed.
Because if someone is telling you to get your bag off the table, because it's not your table because you're not a director, they obviously something didn't get that email, or got the email but doesn't accept the email, which in Japan too, people often think, oh, they don't understand. Well, they understand all right. They just don't agree. And so they don't say, I don't agree. They'll say, I don't understand.
Right.
All this code going on. Right?
Indeed. And I think I should have been more sort of sensitive to that and mitigated that. I mean, now I work in insurance. I should have made sure that, I had a long runway and I built that runway, if I can use that metaphor, and not expected that runway to just, form itself because of, the traffic control tower telling that Tim's going to land.
Yeah.
With this role, when I was running the Indirect sales channel, I was actually doing that from Hong Kong.
Oh.
I briefly left Japan.
Right.
And that was for purely personal reasons.
Right.
As I mentioned before, my sister lives in Hong Kong.
Sure.
But it was a global role, and the company had initially assumed that I would take that role in London.
Oh, okay.
But I said, well, can't I be based in Hong Kong?
Yeah.
Because, our partners are around the globe. I'm going to be on a flight every other week anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
What difference does it make?
Yeah.
And, they were amenable to that. And so I actually briefly left Japan for a year and lived in Hong Kong. And that was 2019.
Right. Just in time.
Just in time for the riots and all the strife, if you like, that fell upon Hong Kong that year.
Yes.
Which itself was a very surreal experience. The end of that year, after this transformation of the Indirect channel, we're talking about once that had been completed, I was basically asked, I don't need to move to London, or, we think of an alternative. And as much as, my other sister lives in London, as much as, living in London would be fantastic, I'm sure, my life is very much here in Asia, here in Japan. It's a bit too far away from family in Australia.
That's true. Yep.
So I made a decision to take a very nice exit arrangement and come back to Japan at the start of 2020, which ended up being a very lucky
You're lucky you got into the country, because you wouldn't have gotten in later. Yeah.
No, in fact, I actually left. I was flatting with my cousin in Hong Kong, and I had left because I was sort of back and forth between home here in Japan and Hong
Hewitts
Kong.
are a very international family.
We are.
Sister in London, sister in Hong Kong, cousin in Hong Kong. I mean, you people are populating the world here.
Yeah,
Good.
well, another cousin
Very
who's a pilot.
Oh my goodness, great. Okay.
Living in the US. So no, I'm poor mum. We've all flown the nest, and she's a bit dismayed about that. But anyway, nonetheless, fortune was on my side at the time. But it was the first time in my life I was technically unemployed since I was 14.
Wow. Okay.
And so that was also, another moment of having to believe in myself, having, to believe that, yes, I will be able to get a job. And sort of launching myself into uncharted territory, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
Within a couple of months, I found myself working for KKR's largest portfolio company in Japan as second in charge of the legal function.
Wow.
So, I was, and literally started on the 1st of April, 2020. Went in, got my laptop, and was sent home.
Well, KKR is a massive machine, isn't it? It's a legendary company populated by a huge number of very wealthy people, from what I can see. So that must have been fairly exciting. Oh, I'm going to be extremely wealthy if I stay here.
Indeed, KKR is a colossus, and but in Japan, as most a lot of other private equities, they're still they're not new to Japan, but they're growing, and there's a lot of interest for private equity firms now coming into Japan, and that's actually really been a theme which has brought me to my current role. But for KKR, this company Marelli, was very much in the news. What was to take this company, Japanese tier one automotive manufacturer, combine that with an Italian tier one, and basically make a manufacturer, maybe the third or fourth, largest manufacturer to manufacture the future vehicle, the future electric connected vehicle. That was the strategy.
Right.
Unfortunately, COVID hit.
Right.
And then, all the OEMs pulled their orders and everything ground to a halt.
Yep.
And it was a moment before, what private equity will do, the transformations that they will do to a company, the kind of the efficiencies they will create, before that could really get underway.
Yeah.
This happened, and with automotive, you have a very small pool of customers who control you.
Yeah.
And so what was, the trajectory to take this company to IPO in a couple of years was very much, saving it from don't want to say the B word, but it's in the news. It got, very close. What I did experience in the end was helping to manage, one of the largest financial restructurings in Japan, and actually the first company to avail itself of the simplified rehabilitation procedures.
Right.
And, in the end, fortunately, and, testimony to KKR and the management team they put in, they were able to, save this company and actually then, put in more investment. And now I think it's doing very well.
Turn around. And so how long are you there?
I was there 3 years.
3 years. And then from there you come to BMS?
To BMS. So
here's the sort of thing.
Yep.
Okay, so you've got no particular background in insurance. It's started about 1980, I believe, as a company. So it's not super old. I mean, it's pretty good, it's 40 odd years or something. But in Japan, started when?
There was someone before me who assisted with getting sort of up and running, and the office you're in, and the license and such. But it was critical to hire someone who would become operationally responsible, and that was my role. And
so
literally a year.
You were basically a startup.
Indeed.
As a company, right? And so again, what's the attraction for your side as a lawyer? You've been in different industries now. To do a startup in Japan, that's again a very interesting career choice.
This role had all the things I wanted in a job, and it was very fortunate, that I've got introduced to my boss Sandra, and presented this opportunity. How it came about, indeed, actually, whilst I was at Marelli, we were doing a number of divestitures. And selling non-core businesses, which is typical for a PE to come in and focus on the core and sell the things that aren't core. And through that, I was reintroduced actually to M&A insurance. Often private equities sellers that will insist a buyer take the insurance so that it can facilitate a clean exit. So as we were discussing before, instead of having to negotiate an indemnity or some sort of hold back from the seller, you get insurance. The insurer comes in, and they can offer basically the recourse. So it facilitates the seller to have a clean exit, and that's the real strategic use for this type of insurance and why it's kind of proliferated. And it just happened, at that time when I was working on deals with insurance, that I was approached by my boss to have a discussion about setting up BMS in Japan.
Right.
With our foundation in M&A insurance. No. I didn't come from an insurance background.
No.
I wasn't an insurance broker. But that's not atypical for BMS. The model is to hire experts who, be it for M&A, who've had that experience, and then train them to be brokers.
So you had that experience before of going in too fast, too hard. Second time, this particular occasion where you're actually going into a completely new industry as a startup, what was going through your mind there in terms of, okay, how am I going to approach this one? What are you thinking there?
I guess I'm very masochistic, in terms of the challenge I like to put upon myself. First of all, it was, could I even do this? Now, the biggest hurdle for getting this job was becoming licensed as a Japanese insurance broker.
What does that mean?
That means passing the non-life insurance broker's exam.
In Japanese?
In Japanese. It's 4 tests. They're all 1 hour each, multiple choice, and there's about 6 textbooks you need to learn all of about 1,000 pages altogether.
Mm.
I'm told I'm not the only foreigner who has this license, but I am the
Can't
only.
be too many.
I'm the only foreigner from a non-character language background, and apparently there's about 5 of us altogether.
Oh, okay.
But essentially, I'm the only non-Chinese
yes,
with this
Yes,
license.
Yes.
So that was the biggest hurdle, and I think that's also why it's a little bit difficult to find someone who's suitable for the role, because they need to have experience, particularly for this type of insurance. Ideally, they've worked as an M&A lawyer, so it needs to be someone who's got that experience, who's willing to do something commercial, but is also, if they're not Japanese, has a Japanese good enough to be able to pass the exam.
Did you knock the exam off in one go?
Unfortunately, I didn't. The last one I did. I perfected my study strategy by the end. The first one, I got it on the second go, and the first time I just sat the test without really having studied enough.
Winging it?
You could call it winging it, and that was just to sort of gauge, is this something I could do?
It's very bold.
Well, I wanted, before I actually accepted the job, I wanted to sort of be confident that there's something I could do. As I did that, then accepted the position, the exams got exponentially harder.
All right.
But it was a great, like I said, it was a great mathematics challenge. It was a great challenge to sort of get my Japanese back to a level where I didn't think it was. It hadn't been for a while.
Especially reading. Now, you're not writing because it's multi-choice, so that's
Correct.
one saviour there. But still, you've got to be able to read the kanji.
That's
You've got
right.
to understand, here's the question, here's the potential answers. Which one of these is... Was it one of those cases where the exam, there's more than one correct answer, is one of those? Or
Yes.
which makes it even more difficult.
Indeed, there are 4 options.
Yep.
And usually comes up, here are 2 statements.
Yeah.
Is both A and B correct? Is A correct but B is incorrect? Is A incorrect but B is correct? Or are they both incorrect?
Oh, yes, I go.
And you have 3 minutes for each, a bit under 3 minutes for each question. I'm not allowed to take in a dictionary, so there's a lot of characters that were very new to me, in a language, in a jargon that was very new to me. And there was a real kind of psychological twist for me at the end, because if you failed, it would come up green and say
Green?
fugokaku.
Oh.
Whereas if you, and normally, as we're used to, if it's green is you passed.
Yeah,
And
red is normally the
So,
colour you expect.
there's sort of
Disconcerting.
right, a little anguish at
choice
the
there,
end if
yeah.
I didn't get it right. But I knew at the end of the day it was going to be probability that would get there. So, and here we are.
And so you're just starting out. You got to kick this off from now. And I guess what's the plan? You to get to X number of people by a certain period of time. I mean, what are you thinking there in terms of expansion?
Indeed. Before I explain that, maybe I explain the difference between me. Now, effectively, I'm in a sales role.
Right.
And what's the difference between, my experience previously when I was going into a sales leadership role
Sure.
and to now? The difference is I have technical expertise in what I'm selling. I'm a lawyer. I'm an M&A experienced lawyer. I've worked on many M&A transactions. So the science of this job, if you like, I understand. The art, no. That's my huge learning curve. Fortunately, I have an incredible team who's able to sort of help me bridge that gap.
Now, how big's the team at this point?
In Japan, we're only 2 of us, actually. But
Right.
in Asia, we are the largest team who work in this type of insurance brokerage.
Right.
And there's,
And is the plan to grow Japan to be a much larger operation? Or...
absolutely.
So what's you're sort of thinking, what, I don't know, 20, 30, 50, 100 people? Are we talking about that type
Oh,
of
the
expansion?
sky's the limit. No.
That empire building, here we go again. Yes, I want 100 people in a month. Yeah.
It's not so much about the number of people we would have. It's about having the right people to be able to really make a difference for our clients.
And it sounds like that's not an easy ask either, because the particular niche area of the law you're talking about has got, like, you've got a very unique background to be able to do that. So it's got to be someone a little bit like you, I guess. So finding those sorts of people, rather than someone who's been in insurance, is not going to be that easy.
Indeed. hopefully I'll have an announcement very soon.
Good.
But the person I'm looking for is not necessarily another broker. It is someone who is, and this is for, a sales production role, but someone who is very much in the M&A ecostream in a way that I haven't been. So maybe someone from a bank, someone from, an M&A, advisory, someone who has those connections, someone from a private equity, who's done many transactions, who's used this insurance, who can sort of speak to people who would be candidates for it in a way that I can't.
So what about actually selling someone on the proposition? Because for a lot of companies, a startup in Japan is a startup. Trying to get people to join you is not that easy because there's lots and lots of potential jobs out there, a lot of demand. People are now, I'm calling it the free agent era of Japanese employee, where young people particularly have got a lot of choices. There's no stigma about their career hire anymore. They can jump out after, 30% of them are jumping out after the first 3 or 4 years and going somewhere else. And so for all of us who are in hiring people, it's the sort of power shift is to go on the other way to the employee as opposed to the employer. So actually getting someone to come on board, not that easy anymore. So how are you finding that? And how do you actually get them excited about taking on this role in a startup?
Indeed. It's very difficult. I think this is really my test of how good I can sell something.
Well, exactly, right. If you can't sell it to them, you're not going to sell it, you're going to be able to grow. So it's one of the key sales, isn't it?
Indeed. Fortunately, so we've had quite a bit of success starting up, and we've placed insurance now for a number of deals, including some high profile transactions. So word of mouth is working for us. We have some recruiters who are, out there spruiking our brand and the rest of it.
That's good.
But to your point, it's very difficult to sell, right? Because we're not an established brand yet, not here in Japan at least.
So how are you doing it?
Well, interestingly, I've had a lot of interest. I'm having, but it is from people who are looking for a new challenge, and so are looking for a pivot. And I think that's actually kind of important. I think if we offer something very compelling to someone who's willing to change the direction of their career and sort of pivot. Why I think it would make sense, and if you're out there, please do contact me. For someone who's in the M&A ecostream,
in some dimension,
in some capacity, this is a great way of staying in that, in a very crucial role, in a very key role. As we just discussed and briefly touched on, this type of insurance that we broker is ultimately a deal facilitator. Right. It helps protect the synergy value. Helps protect relations, particularly
I love to hear lawyers talking about a deal creator, synergistic enabler. When the reputation is usually the deal stopper. So great. Not at all. Great to see this turnaround.
Not at all. I mean, I could spend all day talking about how this insurance makes so much sense.
So here's a point. You're starting up and you're starting to accumulate people. Do you have a plan in your mind yet about, what type of company are we going to create here in Japan? What type of culture am I going to build here in Japan? How am I going to, as a leader, what's my approach going to be? Have you thought through that?
Absolutely.
What you thinking about that?
To describe it in terms of, our culture, we will be a disruptor in this market. Partly because of a critical strategic decision we took to be a broker and not an agent. Now, we could devote another whole podcast on
what's the difference,
the difference between an agency model and a brokerage model in Japan. Just very quickly, most insurance in Japan gets placed through agents. An agent is an agent of its principal, so it works for the insurer. A broker, on the other hand, it works for the insured, is a fiduciary to the insured. And so I will work on behalf of the insured, on their behalf, to get the best terms I can with the insurers. That's critical because one of BMS's, fundamental values is independence. The other is to be innovative and to be specialist.
Right.
And so that's really the kind of culture I want to drive here. I want us to become known as the place you go to for this type of insurance because of our independence, because of our technical expertise. We'll be able to broker for you a better policy than you can get anywhere else.
Right.
First and foremost.
So that whole thing around the disruptor part, I'm sure that's going to be attractive for some people who want to do something fresh, new, innovative in the market, and solid company, global, all that. I can see how that could be pitched together. If you're going to think about your own definition of leadership, what would that be?
The definition would be it's charismatic. I definitely lead by personality, but considerate and caring.
Okay.
That's also just not just for our clients and for our within the team as well. I want working here to be psychologically safe place to work.
Okay.
Where you can thrive despite your idiosyncrasies, and that your quirks are actually a plus, not a detriment.
So you're anticipating these disruptors are going to be bringing the idiosyncrasies and quirks with them.
Absolutely.
Because in that, by definition, if you're asking someone to step out of the mainstream and join a startup and be a disruptor, that personality profile will not be your normal grey cardigan, slippers type of Japanese person. If it's a Japanese person, right, you're automatically selecting for quite a different type of outlook, aren't you?
Indeed.
Yeah, very interesting.
And so that brings it back to who am I looking for? When I came on, I was very much clear that my face is my problem. I'm not Japanese. In order for us to show that we're invested in this country, and we're genuine about that and have a long-term view, well, we need to have someone that personifies that commitment.
There's also the point that as the president, or in your case, country head, representative director, country head, so not president, but in that lead position, there are certain things that you can't be doing because they would expect someone in your company to be taking care of that. And if you're doing it, they think, well, something wrong with this company. Why is the head of the organization doing that task? When
Indeed.
Clearly, that's not something they should be doing. They should be up here, not down here. So you also have that credibility issue with the clients in terms of, well, hang on a minute, what's going on here? So yeah, you'll need to fill that out so that a lot of this stuff is being done by someone who's Japanese,
Indeed.
possibly, and who's at that level for that particular task, and you're sort of sitting above that.
Yep.
Yeah. Not initially, but
And
eventually
it's just about, you talk about leadership, first and foremost, it's finding people who have complementary skill sets.
Yeah.
And really tapping into, that the more diverse we are, the better we are as a team.
Yeah.
And diverse skill sets. But you'll find, and what I've been really impressed, the sort of resumes that have come my way have really, shocked me actually in terms of
okay, great.
the level now in the of Japanese bilingual now have had very incredible kind of foreign experiences in different industries,
right.
Within this space,
right.
And have come from very diverse backgrounds who might look Japanese, but
international,
very international
in that sense. Yeah.
Now they're very much the sort of my target. I think partly to fit in with our culture.
Yep.
Partly because they're probably used to not quite fitting in and doing something different, and are comfortable with doing that.
Well, they're self-selecting too, aren't they?
Indeed.
They're not signing up for some hardcore old-style Japanese organization, which is tremendously hierarchical and inflexible and doesn't really care about their foreign experience and their expertise in dealing at the national level, right? So they realize no point going there.
Yeah.
Where can I go somewhere else where I can really use my capacity?
Indeed, and what we provide for someone is really a platform.
Yeah.
Kind of, we're not startup in the sense that we're a small company, with no infrastructure. It's an amazing place you come in to sort of, leverage a platform, but then to sort of build a profile in a growing market as an expert.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, where I want to go. I want to be kind of known as, one of these consultancies that aren't fit for everyone because we are very niche, we are very expert, but we deliver value because of that. in a very, selected way.
So you're playing to your strengths, aren't you? That's and you're framing that in the discussion with someone to join around the strengths of what the potential is here. And that's the sales pitch, for want of a better word, to them to say, well, come and join us and be part of that and grow this business here. Well, Tim, this has been fascinating. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Greg.
We've had a very interesting, walk through your career, and I think unique that you don't meet too many people in Japan who are foreigners who become the head organizations who've come from a legal background.
Yeah.
That's unique, I think, in itself. And I think I was reading something today in the FT in the UK about the number of CFOs who are becoming leaders, and they're saying there's a bit of a trend there. In the States, there are a lot of lawyers become leaders, but in Japan, not so common.
No.
Not so common. So, you're in a very elite group there.
Oh.
Very elite group there. Absolutely.
Don't know about that, but thank you, Greg.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it.
So please join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.